This is Ma'ad Dezete on Tempo Afrique TV, coming to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA. I am Amy Naguse, and I will be your host today. Today we'll be talking with the talented Sabrina Aman, director and producer of The Forgotten documentary and founder of Refuge Care, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Sabrina is joining us via Skype today from California. Hello, Sabrina. Welcome to Ma'ad Dezete.
Hello. Good morning from not so sunny Los Angeles right now.
I bet it's definitely better than the bitter cold of Minnesota right now. So
Indeed.
yeah, so Sabrina, please introduce yourself to our viewers.
Okay, my name is Sabrina Aman. I am an Eritrean American woman that now lives in Los Angeles, from Virginia, raised by two Eritrean immigrants. I am currently in LA pursuing a career in documentary filmmaking, as well as my nonprofit Refuge Care that serves Eritrean refugee camps in East Africa.
Great. We're so glad to have you here today.
Thank you.
Now we will share a trailer of The Forgotten. Then we will continue our conversation with Sabrina. So viewers, enjoy.
The place was dangerous. My visit had to be kept a secret. So I stayed under the radar, hiding my cameras, hiding my intentions. After a 30-year struggle, the country of Eritrea gained its independence from Ethiopia in 1991 and formed one of the most oppressive and abusive governments on earth. Since then, 5,000 Eritreans have been fleeing their homeland every month. Some crossed the Mediterranean escaping to Europe, most of whom are unaccompanied children, orphans, and women. Others to the United States. But for thousands, life is spent in camps the size of cities as permanent refugees in neighboring Sudan, forgotten by the rest of the world. These are the people I came to see. I want to give them a voice, to share their stories, to let the world see what I've seen, hear what I've heard, and feel what I felt.
That was such an emotional and captivating story. I hope you all are eager to watch the full documentary coming to Minneapolis, Minnesota on Saturday, March 30th. The screening will take place at the Heights Theater at 12:30 p.m., which is located at 3951 Central Ave Northeast, Columbia Heights, Minnesota. This information will also be provided to you all in the show notes on YouTube. We will also share where to find Sabrina on all social media platforms so we can all stay up to date with what projects Sabrina is currently working on and how we can all continue to support the documentary's success and bringing awareness to the realities of the circumstances of our Eritrean brothers and sisters and all those conditions they've been facing. So thank you, Sabrina, for being here today and sharing your story with us. Please share more of your background with us, like where you grew up, where you went to school. We would definitely love to continue getting to know you.
Okay, I was born in Virginia, and but I grew up in Qatar. So right after I was born, they took me to Qatar, where I was raised. I went to middle school, elementary school there, and then we moved to Eritrea in 1997. We used to actually go to Eritrea twice a year, every year growing up, winter holidays, summer holidays, just to get acquainted with the culture, to learn Tigrinya, get familiar with everything, which is why now we speak Tigrinya fluently at home. And then in '98, when the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea started again, we had to get out of the country, and we were fortunate enough to be among the ones that were, able to leave the country. And we relocated to Virginia, where I was born. And so I went to university there, George Mason University. I studied communications and public relations. I worked at the World Bank for a few years right after graduation. And at that point, that's when I decided to move to Los Angeles in 2010 to do more hands-on work with my humanitarian passion in the media as well, just a mix of both.
Great, thank you for sharing. So we could just dive right in. Please educate me and our generation on like the history and plight of Eritrean refugees that are currently in Sudan.
The migration of the refugees started in the 1960s out of Eritrea and into Sudan as early as the early 60s, but particularly 1967 was a crucial year of migration, and that was due to the war against Ethiopia. And the refugees who migrated out of Eritrea in the 60s have actually they're still in the refugee camps in Sudan. They've been there for decades. And when the war started again in 1998, even more refugees began to migrate out of Eritrea and now into Ethiopia, into Sudan, other neighboring countries, Europe, Middle East. I mean, it's a large population of Eritreans that have been migrating. I believe the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, in 2015, they said there's about 4,000 to 5,000 refugees fleeing Eritrea every single month into neighboring countries.
Right.
That's about 10% of the population in Eritrea that has fled the country.
Yeah, that's definitely a staggering number, especially for each month. Do you feel like our generation and many of us in the diaspora are aware of what Eritrean refugees are truly going through, or do you think it's more of an out of sight, out of mind?
That's a good question. I don't think they're aware. And if they are aware, they're not aware to the extent that they should be aware. Right. I don't think it's out of sight, out of mind, because once our generation some of the people from our generations have watched the documentary, their life changed as much as mine did. And they actually want to get involved and they want to help, contribute in every platform possible. But the reason you don't see our generation participating as much as they should is because they don't know about it. And the reason they don't know, it's because the crisis, the refugee crisis is not in the forefront of news platforms. Say, for example, like the Syrian refugee crisis, which began after the Eritrean refugee crisis. You see it on every television network, BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN. So everybody's aware of it, not just the Syrians, but people worldwide. We don't have that opportunity with the Eritrean refugee crisis, or we didn't have that opportunity per se, for a few reasons, because we don't have freedom of press in our country. We don't have freedom of speech. But not only do we not have freedom of those things in our country, but even the refugees that are in the refugee camps are afraid to speak up due to retaliation against their family members in Eritrea. So everyone is afraid to speak up due to fear. And so how do you inform people? How do you inform the younger generation? But even the older generation, they're aware of it, but not to the extent that they would be aware of it after they watch the film. You know, from the perspective of a woman who recorded everything to educate people on what really happens in the refugee camps. So I don't think it's out of sight, out of mind. I think our generation is really eager to help, but it only happens after they see the film. They need to see it with their own eyes, and that's why I produced this documentary, because I also didn't know about this issue. Being the daughter of my father, Jamil Aman, who's an activist and who was a freedom fighter, he educated us here and there, but he didn't really tell us what is going on there. The inspiration was a whole different inspiration for me, which we'll talk about later. But I felt like as an Eritrean woman, Eritrean American woman who lives in America, if I have no idea how bad the camps are, and that could have been me in the camp if I was not fortunate enough to flee the country in 1998 due to being an American, I would have been in the refugee camps. And so I had to figure out a way to document what I saw there. And the only way to do it in a captivating way was to go there myself and record everything and bring the light to everyone.
Definitely. And please also share with us, after independence of Eritrea in 1991, what are some of the major obstacles that people shared with you about going back home at that time?
That's a very good question, because a lot of people ask me after the screenings and the Q&A sessions, why are the refugees still in the camps? Why haven't they gone back after we got our independence in 1991? I think that's a very good question. And I did a lot of research before, on the internet to understand why they didn't return back. That was a question I asked myself. But the most reliable source for me all the time is the people. And so I asked the people myself. I had the opportunity to return to the refugee camps, but this time in Ethiopia, a couple of years ago. And I asked them, I said, why didn't you go back? You know, especially the older generation, after we got our independence. And they said, when Eritrea received its independence, her independence in 91, they were happy to return back to their homeland. They could not wait to return, but they needed the government to make a few promises to them to help them transition back into the country. And first of all, the government was not ready to take them back until 1995. They refused to take them back. It was only due to international pressure, especially from United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, that they said, okay, fine, we'll take them back, you know, in 1995, under the conditions that the refugees had provided the Eritrean government. And those conditions were things like building water wells, building health clinics so that they have access to health care, allowing them to study in the language of Arabic. For example, the refugees who were born in the refugee camps in Sudan, they wanted to continue their education in Arabic because that's the language that they learned. Financial assistance to help them transition back into life until they can find work. And more importantly, for some people, they wanted to live in the cities where their ancestors were from, where their families were from. They didn't want to be displaced. So those were the requests that the refugees made in order for them to feel safe to return back to their country. And the Eritrean government, according to them, said, okay, we'll do that for you. And so a lot of refugees went back to Eritrea. I think it was approximately 23,000 refugees that went back to Eritrea in 1995. But all these promises were broken. All these things that were promised to them were broken. The health clinics were not built, not enough water wells. They were not studying anything in Arabic. They were displaced from their desired cities and communities. Mm-hmm. And so what happened at that point, 80% of them went back to the refugee camps because they felt like the refugee camp was actually better for them than living in Eritrea without any support from the government. And the financial assistance stopped. You know, it started, I think it lasted for about 4 to 5 months, they said, but then it stopped. And so they could not survive there. At least in the refugee camps, they're getting a little bit of support from UNHCR and other organizations. And so that's why they're still in the camps. So it's not like they're in the camps because they don't want to go back to their country or anything. It's because they tried their best and the country was not making the transition easy for them.
Right, and thank you for sharing part of their stories. And we're definitely looking forward to hearing more about the personal stories that are captured in your documentary. And so let's transition back into what inspired you to film The Forgotten.
The inspiration. So if I tell you what inspired me, it's gonna, it's a spoiler alert because it's the actual beginning of the documentary. And all I'm going to say is the inspiration was actually a romantic story between me and a guy. I'm not going to say anymore because, again, it's in the beginning of the documentary. So I encourage people to watch the film, and within the first 5 minutes of the film, they're going to say, oh, wow, this was her inspiration. It's all on there. So, but I don't want to ruin it right now. But it was a romantic story. That's all I'm going to say.
Great, great. People will definitely look forward to hearing about that. I'm curious to know what your family's reaction was like when you told them, hey guys, this is something I'm really passionate about. I want to go to Sudan and hear stories firsthand. What was your father's reaction? What was your mother's reaction like, your siblings? What was their feedback when you initially shared that with them?
Well, first and foremost, it took me 5 years to actually build the courage to go. So it was not an abrupt move like, hey, I'm going to go to the refugee camps. The idea came 5 years prior due to that romantic inspiration that I had. And it took 5 years because I knew that if I went there, that it was risky for so many reasons. It's in the border of Eritrea. I am my father's daughter, and he's a very outspoken activist, so that puts me at higher risk. They have, they're very strict with their policies in the refugee camps. You have to have special permits to enter the camps. All these rules and regulations. And so I changed my mind so many times, but in 2015, I said, I have to go. It's time to go because so many people were dying. So many refugees were fleeing to the refugee camps and then from the refugee camps to Europe in the Middle East, and they were dying and getting tortured and smuggled for ransom. And it was not on television, and that's what was killing me. Every day I turn on the news and I see so many other refugees being spoken about. Syrians, Afghanis, Iraqis, and nothing about Eritrean refugees, nothing. And as an Eritrean woman, I just felt responsible. I felt guilty for the last 5 years. How can I sleep in my bed knowing that this is happening to my brothers and sisters and it's not on television? And so I said, it's risky. I might not come back. Something might happen to me, but it's worth it. I'm doing something that's going to raise awareness. And even if something happens to me, at least I have this documented, and hopefully it's going to land in the hands of the right person who's going to show it to the rest of the world. And so when I told my family, my dad was a bit more supportive. He's very, as you know, he's very fearless. He's outspoken. He's an activist. It's in his blood. He was supportive, but he would only let me go under one condition, and that condition was for him to join me on my mission to go there. He felt like it would be best if we are there together in case anything happened. My mother was very worried, of course, as any mother would be. She was very, very worried that something might happen to me, so she was not comfortable at all. She was following me on Find My iPhone, and she could actually locate me at the refugee camps. She saw whenever our car moved or the bus that we took. But both parents were worried, and I would say my mother was more worried. But I had to do it, and I guess when I came back, she was like, "Okay, never again."
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad you got their support, and the fact that your father was able to go with you is it's such an amazing experience that you guys were able to share together, I bet.
It was, him coming with me was a double-edged sword, because I knew that going without him, I'm already at risk, being his daughter, being a female, not knowing my way around. Going with him also put me at greater risk, because he is a known figure, and I didn't want to increase my chances of being noticed there because of my dad. So it was really a double-edged sword. One was not better than the other, but if I had to choose, I was much more happier with my dad coming with me than not coming, because if anything happened, at least we're going down together,
Right. And also, could you share with us who you joined forces with in this very noble cause in helping spread more awareness in the Eritrean refugee crisis? Can you name some of the organizations that you partnered with in the past and some that you're currently working with as well?
For the specific trip to Sudan, the initial trip to visit the refugee camps in Sudan, I teamed up with our sister organization, ARAHA, which stands for American Relief Agency for the Horn of Africa. They worked with us hand in hand to help us with our trip there, to help us transition with the logistics. And so they are still actually our partner and our sister organization. They've been in the game much longer than I have been, so they are sort of the role model. I look up to them. I ask them for guidance and support. Even when we begin to work on projects in the refugee camps, we have to collaborate with them since they have their local office there. They have relationships. So I collaborated with ARAHA. And then when I went to the refugee camps in Ethiopia, I collaborated with United Nations Refugee Agency. They actually invited me to go with them as what they call the honorary representative or high-profile supporter to speak to the refugee camps. So yeah, those are the two organizations.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. And how has the documentaries, all the screenings, been going so far? Share with us the response of people nationwide and even worldwide too, and how people have been responding to hearing the stories.
Wow. Oh my God. The responses were beyond what I ever expected. It blew my mind. I completely underestimated the project because it's my project. And I was honestly shocked. We were sold out in every city. We showed it in Los Angeles, Bay Area, Washington, D.C., Virginia, Toronto, Ottawa. Tickets were sold out instantly. It was approximately 200 people in every theater. It was a full house. Some people were standing up watching the movie. We had a great Q&A session. We were able, my father and I, to attend every screening. We had a news anchor that was our moderator, a very famous news anchor in every location that was our Q&A moderator. We were shocked by the turnout. People were inspired. Everyone raised their hand during the Q&A session to ask questions. The younger generation was so connected. Because they had no idea. Once again, they didn't see it to that extent. They didn't know it was that bad. And especially for them to see it from the perspective of a fellow young Eritrean American woman, they could feel more connected to that than hearing it from, say, like their father or mother, you know?
Right.
So the turnout was amazing. We've been contacted by communities in Europe, Germany, Amsterdam, Sweden, London, Australia, the Middle East to come and screen it there. We're actually planning to go to Europe in April to screen it in a few countries there. Of course, after Minneapolis on March 30th. But the turnout really blew my mind. It's been far more successful than I ever imagined.
Oh, that is so great to hear. We're really excited to have you guys come do the screening here on March 30th, and ready to share it with all our friends and family and our
I can't hear you.
Well.
The volume is very low.
Oh, could you hear? Is it better?
Yeah, it's better now.
Is that better? Okay, so we're so excited for the screening that's going to be happening here in Minneapolis on Saturday, March 30th, and just looking forward to the Q&A session and just kind of getting to know all of you guys as well. And let's also talk a little bit more about your nonprofit organization, Refuge Care. Can you tell us about the organization and the one that you started to focus more on Eritrean refugees?
Okay, so Refuge Care was launched a year and a half ago. And it's a 501c3 nonprofit registered here in California, and it was launched as a result of this film to create a platform to receive support from people, specifically the younger generation. That's my target. That's my focus. Basically, the goal for Refuge Care is to collaborate with the existing nonprofits, Araha and Ithar and UNHCR. So I'm sorry, should I continue or should I wait for you guys? So yeah, so the Refuge Care was created to in an effort to collaborate with the existing nonprofits. But what we're trying to focus on is perhaps areas that I feel like might have been neglected. So, you know, the first thing you think about when you think about things refugees need is water, nutrition, healthcare. But there are some areas that have been neglected that I heard from the refugees' mouth when I went to the refugee camps in Ethiopia. And those were the areas of activities and sports and entertainment. And when you hear that, you may think it's not that important. It's not as important as food and clean water. But really, it's important because what's happening is due to lack of these activities in the refugee camps, they're bored. They have nothing to do. And as a result of that, they're fleeing the refugee camps and risking their lives to go to Europe. And when I asked them about this journey that they're eager to take to Europe, they said, we would rather take that risk knowing that we might not make it than to stay bored in the refugee camps. And they said, if you want us to stay in the refugee camps, give us a reason to stay in the refugee camps. Give us some sports to play, some sporting equipment, athletic attire, soccer balls, basketballs, music, anything that will help us feel like, you know what, this is not a camp, this is a community. And that's what Refuge Care wants to focus on, turning camps into communities, and specifically in those areas, in collaboration with the existing nonprofits.
Yeah, that's amazing work. It's really interesting how we always just take for granted just the little things that, you know, keep us busy here, and also just kind of uplift your spirits as well, too. So that's just such a great mission overall.
Thank you.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to kind of point out is that obviously the realities of our brothers and sisters is extremely heavy. With all of the different people that you met, could you please share a memory of someone that just brought you joy or a lot of laughter while you and your father were in Sudan? I know that there definitely can be many people and definitely a lot of stories that were very memorable that you can think of, but what's one memory that just comes off the top of your head?
You know, yeah, it's so hard to pick, you know, it's almost like asking someone, who do you love more, your father or your mother, you know? You can't choose, you have to say both.
Right.
So there's so many, you know, so many people that really touched my heart. I mean, I can easily name like 10, 20 people or stories, but what stood out the most to me is not one person, it's the children. The children really touched my heart because they have no idea that they're in refugee camps. They don't really understand because they were born in the refugee camps. And so I remember I spent a lot of time playing with the kids, and I asked them if they want to come back to America with me, and they said no. And I said, why not? It's so nice there. And they said, we love it here. We're happy, because they don't know better, you know? So they're making the most out of it. And that's just so innocent and so vulnerable and so beautiful. But they're so bright and energetic and capable and smart. And I mean, they have such a bright future ahead of them if only they had the opportunity. And so to us, to Refuge Care and Araha and all the other nonprofits, education in the camps is so critical for these kids. You know, they are the future of our country. And so they're already very intelligent and educated at such a young age. And so they just need our support. They need extra tools, educational tools, to really just help help push them up the ladder. So those are the people that stood out to me the most, the children, because they're so happy and so innocent and just so free spirited, you know, despite all the obstacles, because they don't really understand it.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing. And that's so relatable, because it's always the children that just like tug at your heart. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
And you're providing such a large platform to bring awareness to Eritrean refugees all over, and providing an opportunity to amplify their voices. When you are on the ground and tirelessly doing the work and like witnessing and hearing the different conditions that they're all facing, something I'm always interested in hearing about and just learning more about is how you take care of yourself. I know self-care is a huge thing here in the West, but what are some things that you do to take care of yourself throughout this whole journey?
You know, the crazy part is when I'm on the ground, I'm not focusing on taking care of myself because I'm feeding off of adrenaline. Everything you see, everything you hear is it's intense that if we heard it here in the US, it would be too much for us to hear, for instance. But when you're at the refugee camps, you sort of let go of who you are and the luxury that you're used to in the US. You really start blending in and relating to them. And you're on survival mode, you are feeding off of adrenaline, and you really just, I'm not even focused on self-care. But I do remember the first time I went to Sudan, I went to Sudan to film this documentary. I was shocked. I mean, I found out they didn't have a toilet where I was staying the first time, and they had that toilet on the floor. They didn't have toilet paper, and I was huffing and puffing to my dad, like, I'm not using that toilet on the floor. I need a toilet, and I need a toilet paper. It was completely American of me, or Western of me, you know? And my dad said, Sabrina, this is what they use here. You are in their country. This is what they use. And so you need to let go of this Western lifestyle you're privileged to have and really just accommodate yourself in their country. And not just that, but I remember I was complaining about the cold shower. We didn't have access to warm water, and so I had to take cold showers every day. And once again, my dad had to remind me that this is what they wash themselves with, cold water, and to stop huffing and puffing and to humble myself and, you know, get used to it. And within weeks, I got accustomed to it. And ever since then, every time I visit the refugees, I'm no longer focusing on self-care. I'm really just feeding off of the adrenaline and focusing on them and trying to figure out how to help them. The self-care that I probably need to focus on more is now when I'm back here. Because what happens is I'm back to my Western lifestyle, to my comfort, to my bed, to my home, you know, to the luxury that we have here in the United States. How do you take care of yourself when you're here, but you're still trying to help them? You somehow, you know, I go through this time where I feel disconnected from them a little bit because I'm busy here with my own life. And so sometimes it becomes overwhelming, too much for me to do something. It can be a little bit stressful, you know. But what I do whenever I feel a little bit disconnected from them, a little bit overwhelmed, is I go back to my hard drive, I connect my hard drive, and I start watching the videos that I recorded, because I have many hours of videos that I recorded that are not in the documentary. And I watch the kids, and I watch the elders, I watch the disabled people, and right away it refuels my energy, and it reminds me that they need my help, they need our help, and to not forget them. And right away it humbles me. And so the self-care for me is more critical here in the US than it is actually on the ground, you know. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners? Just please tell us where we can find you on all social media platforms and any action steps that our listeners can take to continue supporting the crisis.
So the last thing I want to say to everyone watching this is thank you for watching it, first of all. And thank you for your interest to learn more about this refugee issue, the Eritrean refugee crisis. I encourage you all to partner up with me, to collaborate with me. A lot of questions that I received in the past from the younger generation specifically is, how can we help? What can one person do? What can we do? Because they feel intimidated. They feel like one person can't do enough. But one person can do a lot. You know what I mean? I mean, one person, myself, I did a documentary that is educating thousands of people. And so I can do so little by myself, but I can do so much if I had partners. And by partners, I mean not just donors. I mean, we need donors as well, but volunteers, people that can call me and say, hey, what can I do to help you? I have an idea. Let's, let's work on projects together. There's endless projects that I have actually created already, but I need help with it. So I'm looking for volunteers. I'm looking for partners. It doesn't matter where you're located in the US. A lot of students reached out to me from various universities across the United States as a result of this film, offering a helping hand. So I encourage people to continue reaching out to me, specifically the younger generation. We can do it. Teamwork makes the dream work. You could reach out to me on social media. I have an Instagram account called The Forgotten Documentary. I have an Instagram, a Facebook page called The Forgotten Documentary. Also for my nonprofit, I have a Facebook account called Refuge Care, R-E-F-U-C-A-R-E, Refuge Care. You could reach out to me directly on the website, theforgottendocumentary.com or refugecare.org, or my personal account, Sabrina Aman, on Facebook. So I have so many ways you could reach out to me. It is not an excuse. You can't say you haven't found me on the internet. You can just Google me and you'll find me somewhere. So the only thing I have to say is I encourage you to collaborate with me. I encourage you to remember our brothers and sisters that are less fortunate than us in the camps. You know, it could have been you, it could have been your sister, your brother, your father, your mother, it could have been me. And if that was us, we would hope and pray that other people will remember us and that they will think of us and help us. The Forgotten was titled not by me, but by the refugees. They are the ones that said, we are forgotten. You know, terasi'na lana, which is we are forgotten in Tigrinya. They said, please go back to your country and tell the Eritrean community that we are the forgotten. So when I was thinking for a perfect title for the documentary, I could not help it but think that this is the one thing a lot of refugees kept saying, we are the forgotten. And so I encourage you guys to remember them.
Thank you. And I must say, we are all really looking forward to the upcoming screening here in Minneapolis. Coming up in a few weeks, Minnesota viewers, you can purchase your tickets to the Saturday, March 30th screening here in Minneapolis on the American Relief Agency for the Horn of African website. And everyone, please go and just take a moment on Facebook and search for The Forgotten Documentary. Hit the like button. Also, as Sabrina mentioned, you could find her on Instagram as well at The Forgotten Documentary. Hit follow and just continue to support the cause. Thank you, Sabrina, so much for sharing your story with all of us and continuing to amplify the voices of Eritrean refugees. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in today. I just hope that we all can take action and remember that it is our responsibility to continue providing a platform for Eritrean refugees worldwide and sharing their stories. Thank you, and see you at the March 30th screening here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Sabrina, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to Tempo Africa TV for hosting this interview. The pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Thank you.